Good evening. I'm back in the saddle after my Christmas hiatus here. And tonight I'd like to talk to you about a book I recently read. In fact, it was the last one that I did. Rhineland, Hitler's Last Defense, 1944-45 by the British author Anthony Tucker Jones. This is one that, short answer, I can highly recommend. He's very general in his scope, dealing with the broad front on the German borders, starting in towards the end of 1944, going into 1945, right until German surrender. And he deals with each section in its own concise terms, starting off especially with Aachen and the Hürtgen Forest, and working his way down through Alsace, and then the penetration into the Reich and the Ruhr Pocket. What is conspicuous for its absence are campaigns that would generally suck the oxygen out of the room. Arnhem and the Bulge. Now, most people are already familiar with both. Anybody who's going to read this book has some familiarity with both. And Tucker Jones does not completely ignore them, but they can't be the focus of the book. They are worthy of their own volumes. And he and numerous other authors have treated them as such. So they're mentioned, they're there, their effect on the later battles along the both banks of the Rhine are that's certainly taken into consideration. So are wider issues. There is some mention of the Eastern Front and the Soviets' drive across the Seelow Heights into Berlin, but these are not primary foci. The main issues here are battles along the Rhine on both sides. And he does a very good job. His perspective is mainly from that of the Germans. This doesn't mean that he's out there making excuses for the Reich or their idiot Austrian boss, but it just means that he's looking at command issues and missions largely from the perspective of the defenders. Hence the subtitle, Hitler's Last Defense, 1944-45. It's not the Allies' last offensives, it's how the Germans defended against them. And to that end, he uses a lot of German sources as well as American and British ones particularly, but he's looking at things from the German perspective when they were given a very difficult job that was well nigh impossible considering the lack of resources, diminishing manpower, poor infrastructure, the effects of Allied strategic bombing, and of course their idiot boss in Berlin, who turned a very difficult job into one that was well nigh impossible. So these are the issues that he covers more than the Allied side, although they are considered. And he does use primary sources, including Crusade in Europe by Dwight David Eisenhower, which gives a good perspective of higher command at this time. And he critiques both the German defense with its mistakes and battles that were predetermined. Like I remember the famous story of a Pittsburgh Pirate who said, "We lose every time they play that song." And the manager said, "What song's that?" He says, "The national anthem." Well, there were a lot of German battles that were over by the national anthem because of a lack of quality troops, lack of any troops, lack of material, fuels, logistics, whatever they needed, the Germans lacked. And Tucker Jones goes into this in great detail and puts up a really good contrast between the Allies' relative abundance of supplies, with the exception, of course, of the fuel issue, which resulted in a competition between Patton and Montgomery, again dealt with by the author. But the Germans were short on everything. And it was virtually impossible for them to win this campaign. That said, he goes into detail about the how and why, and especially the when. He's very clear. There's no equivocating here. He's also clear on things that we might take for granted. For example, identifying combat formations. He won't just say name of a division, he'll put the nationality in front of it habitually. Now, some people might think that's rather basic, and it is basic, but it's one of those basics that makes for a much more clear story, especially when you have cases in which there were troops of multiple armies facing each other, not just the Germans versus Americans, British, or French, but the Americans cooperating with the British or the French. And then you get into command issues, especially with the French. And this level of basic clarity really comes in handy. Speaking of the French, they get more attention here than maybe a lot of American readers are used to seeing. He goes into their command structure, which was actually two parallel lines of command. The French army in Alsace, for example, reported to the American Army Group commander, Jacob Devers, who reported to Eisenhower. However, they also had a parallel line of command to Charles de Gaulle, who was the de facto head of government in Paris, which creates a whole lot of issues of de Gaulle wanting something. For example, Tucker Jones deals with the French land grab in southern Germany, where de Gaulle wanted the French to capture territory in order to have a stronger hand at post-war negotiations. France would be recognized as an equal combatant, and also to carve out an occupation zone for the French in Germany. And this goal sometimes went counter to the goals of Eisenhower and Devers, which were really focused on the immediate military situation rather than the post-war political one. De Gaulle had an eye on both, but especially on the post-war situation. And also, too, there's a political element that is often neglected, and that is the composition of the French army in Alsace, which was, put it mildly, kind of questionable. And one reason was that de Gaulle wanted to neutralize the communist resistance elements of the old Free French of the interior and get them into combat and away from Paris and the levers of power. Therefore, they were sent to French combat units facing the Germans in conventional warfare instead of troublemaking in the streets and the union halls and the legislative bodies in Paris. Get them out of the way, keep them busy. And the French army absorbed these guys. Some of them were not especially good leaders. The officers were more used to operating on their own. They were guerrilla fighters and resistance leaders, which does not make them great conventional maneuver combat commanders. I'm surprised they did as well as they did. But they got out of Paris. At the same time, the French army was copiously armed by the United States. Now, even though it was the arsenal of democracy, the Americans never could arm as many divisions as de Gaulle wanted. And so there were always political sensitivities at work with the French army and with de Gaulle, you think? Yeah, we've heard this story before, but the author goes into it in the specific context of the liberation of the Upper Rhine. Now, I do think, though, that his treatment of the French and the situation along the Upper Rhine is one of the strongest points of the book. We have a lot of situations that Americans might know a little bit about, might be able to find it on a map. for example, the Colmar Pocket. And there was also a proposal from Eisenhower's headquarters at one point in the face of a German offensive to abandon the recently liberated city of Strasbourg. These were both probably more important to the French than anybody else. And there was a consensus among the French that they would not abandon Strasbourg after liberating it. Being a contested city between the Reich and the Republic, it was a sensitive matter, to put it mildly. They were not going to give it up. That was not a hill, but it was the hill they were willing to die on, or better yet, kill Germans upon. So this is not just a military who, what, where, when, who attacked whom defended, and with what. No. Tucker Jones does go into the deeper issues. And it is comprehensive, with the exception of leaving out the Bulge and Market Garden, which we know about, and they have their own books, and I think it's a strength that he recognizes that. And I think it's a very, very good introduction, especially into this part of the war. One will find more detailed descriptions and analysis elsewhere, especially the U.S. Army Green Books, which are, even though they're aging, they remain one of the basic sets of texts on the American Army and others in World War II. For someone who is familiarizing themselves or refamiliarizing themselves with the final campaigns against Germany, this is highly recommended. Now, you're not going to find much in here that can really be built into scenarios. For example, if you're doing stuff for Advanced Squad Leader or the old Steel Panther series, but it might give you some ideas. And you will see some of them mentioned, represented in the book. So there is a connection there for wargamers. All in all, there's really nothing I can really say that is negative about the material inside. Now, there are two things that I should mention, sort of in the other side of the column, is that the author makes a lot of mention of how people and things were photographed and uses this as evidence. I would have liked to have seen more of the photographs. That if you mention a picture, to my mind, you show it. Now, I know budgetary issues, they may not have been available for one reason or another. Still, this is something that I missed. That's one thing. Excuse me. The other thing is the maps. I wish there were more. And I wish they had more detail. Oftentimes, an important battle site or town will be mentioned, and you're flipping through looking at the maps, and it's not there. And this is kind of ironic, and this is not on the author. This is on the publisher. And the irony is the publisher is Osprey. Osprey, as we all know, they started off doing the Men-at-Arms series, which were basically painted guides for miniatures players, and went on from there to other series, most notably the campaign series, which were really distinguished by excellent maps and illustrations. Finally, they've been doing a lot of very serious military history, academic type military history. This is a good example. And but this is a publisher in Britain that is known for its maps, and people go there to get the maps as well as the narrative. There just aren't enough, and I'm just not used to seeing maps as a weakness in anything published by Osprey. But there should have been more. They should have been more detailed, and that's on the publisher, not the author. So, in conclusion, the part that you're all waiting for me to end, I recommend it. Read the book, learn something, relearn something, and it definitely comes with the Jim Werbineth line of departure seal of approval. So thank you for your time, and there will be more videos. I'm not taking another 3 weeks or a month off. There'll be more in less time than that. And in the meantime, happy reading. Thank you.